The bullet that shattered Eleanor Jenkins' world didn't even touch her body, but it might as well have torn straight through her heart, leaving a wound that 3 years of Colorado sunshine couldn't begin to heal. She stood behind the counter of Miller's General Store in Silver City, Colorado, her hands mechanically folding bolts of calico while her mind drifted somewhere far away, somewhere safe where memories couldn't reach her. The year was 1878, and the town bustled with miners, ranchers, and drifters, all seeking fortune or escape in these mountains. Eleanor sought neither. She simply existed, moving through her days like a ghost haunting her own life. The bell above the door chimed, and she didn't bother looking up. Another customer meant another transaction, another brief exchange of words that meant nothing, another moment to endure until she could retreat to the small room she rented above the boarding house where silence wrapped around her like a shroud. "Afternoon, miss." The voice was deep, unhurried, with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. Eleanor's fingers stilled on the fabric. She forced herself to meet the stranger's eyes, a skill she'd practiced until it almost felt natural. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn Stetson. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over distant peaks. He couldn't have been more than 25 or 26, perhaps 4 years older than herself. "What can I help you with?" Her voice came out flat, professional, empty of anything resembling warmth. "Need supplies. Running a spread about 10 miles north of here. Name's Owen Tucker." He pulled a list from his shirt pocket, offering it with a slight smile that didn't quite reach those storm cloud eyes, as though he understood smiling was expected but wasn't entirely sure why. Eleanor took the list without comment, scanning the items. Standard ranch supplies, nothing unusual. She began gathering the goods, moving efficiently through the store while Owen Tucker waited by the counter. She could feel his gaze following her, not invasive or leering like some men, but curious, questioning, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle he'd only just discovered. "You been working here long?" he asked, his tone conversational. 2 years." She set a bag of coffee beans on the counter with more force than necessary. "Good town, Silver City, quiet mostly." "Yes." If Owen noticed her reluctance to engage, he didn't show it. He simply waited, patient as a man accustomed to dealing with skittish horses, while she tallied his purchases and wrapped them in brown paper. When she named the total, he counted out the coins carefully, his hands rough with calluses but steady. "Appreciate your help, Miss Jenkins." "Eleanor Jenkins, Miss Jenkins." He touched the brim of his hat, gathering his parcels. "Reckon I'll be back in a few weeks, running low on most everything." She nodded once, dismissive, already turning away before he'd reached the door. The bell chimed his departure, and Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands trembled slightly as she returned to folding fabric, and she hated that tremor, hated the weakness it represented. 3 years ago, she'd been different. She'd laughed easily, trusted freely, believed in love with the naive certainty of a 20-year-old girl who'd never known real cruelty. Then came Robert Morrison, with his charming smile and honey-smooth words, his promises of a future that glittered like fool's gold. She'd believed every lie, had given him everything, her heart, her trust, her innocence, her plans to become a teacher back east when his wife appeared in town. Heavily pregnant and searching for the husband who'd abandoned her months ago, Eleanor's world had crumbled. But that hadn't been the worst of it. The worst came when Robert's schemes caught up with him, when angry men he'd cheated came looking for payment. The worst came in a dark alley behind the saloon in Denver, where Eleanor had followed Robert to plead with him one last time, where gunshots rang out and blood pooled on dirty ground, where Robert's empty eyes stared at nothing while men shouted and boots pounded away into the night. She'd watched him die, watched the light fade from the eyes of the man she'd loved, the man who'd destroyed her, the man who'd never been who she thought he was. The marshal ruled it self-defense, said Robert had drawn first. The shooter disappeared before anyone could get his name. Eleanor was left with nightmares, guilt, and the suffocating knowledge that she couldn't trust her own judgment, couldn't trust anyone, couldn't let herself feel anything because feeling led to pain. So she'd run. Left Denver and the ruins of her reputation, found Silver City where nobody knew her story, where she could disappear into anonymity. She worked, she slept, she survived. Nothing more. The weeks passed in their usual monotonous rhythm. Eleanor served customers with mechanical efficiency, spent her evenings alone with books she barely absorbed, avoided the social gatherings that other young women her age flocked to. The owner of the general store, Harold Miller, a kindly man in his 60s with a salt and pepper beard, worried about her. She could see it in his eyes, in the gentle way he suggested she take Sundays off, maybe attend church socials, maybe make friends her own age. She declined every suggestion. Owen Tucker returned exactly 3 weeks after his first visit. Eleanor was organizing shelves in the back when the bell chimed, and she heard Mr. Miller's greeting, heard that same deep, unhurried voice responding. Her stomach tightened inexplicably. She told herself it was just the normal anxiety she felt around anyone new, but something about Owen Tucker unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite name. When she emerged from the back room, Owen was leaning against the counter, chatting with Mr. Miller about weather and cattle prices. He glanced up when she appeared, and something flickered in those gray-blue eyes, something that might have been pleasure or interest or simple recognition. "Afternoon, Miss Jenkins." "Mr. Tucker." She moved behind the counter, creating the barrier she needed. "Do you have a list?" "I do, but I was also hoping you might help me with something." He pulled out the paper, but his attention remained fixed on her face. "I'm looking to buy fabric. Got 2 ranch hands with wives who have been asking for material to make curtains and such. I don't know the first thing about what they need." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse, to point him toward the fabric section and let him figure it out himself. But Mr. Miller was watching, and this was her job, and refusing to help a customer for no good reason would raise questions she didn't want to answer. "What colors are they looking for?" "Honestly, I have no idea. Maybe you could show me a few options. Something practical for ranch living." She led him to the fabric section, acutely aware of his presence behind her, of the way he moved with a loose-limbed grace unusual for such a big man. She pulled down several bolts, explaining the merits of different materials, the durability of certain weaves. Owen listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions, and despite herself, Eleanor found the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "You know a lot about this," he observed. "I worked in a textile mill before I came here." It was a lie, but a useful one. The truth was that her mother had taught her to sew, back when Eleanor still had a family, back before the fever took both parents within a week of each other when she was 17. Must have been hard work. All work is hard. She kept her tone neutral, professional. Owen studied the fabrics she'd selected, then pointed to 4 different bolts. "I'll take 5 yards of each of those. And Miss Jenkins, I appreciate your patience. I know this probably isn't the most exciting part of your day." Something in his words, in the genuine gratitude beneath them, caught her off guard. She glanced at him sharply, searching for mockery or ulterior motive, but found only honest appreciation. It confused her, made her walls feel suddenly thin and inadequate. She measured and cut the fabric in silence, wrapping each piece carefully. When she returned to the counter to tally everything with his other supplies, Owen was examining a display of penny candies near the register. "These any good?" he asked, pointing to the lemon drops. "I suppose." "I haven't tried them. You work in a general store and you've never tried the candy." He sounded genuinely surprised. "I'm not much for sweets." Owen purchased 2 small bags anyway, paying for everything and gathering his parcels. As he turned to leave, he set 1 bag of lemon drops on the counter. "For you, can't work surrounded by candy and never try any. That's just wrong." Before Eleanor could protest, he was gone, the bell chiming cheerfully in his wake. She stared at the small paper bag like it was a snake coiled to strike. The gesture meant nothing, she told herself. It was just candy, just a friendly impulse from a customer. It didn't mean anything. But that night, alone in her room, she opened the bag and put 1 lemon drop in her mouth. The tart sweetness exploded across her tongue, bright and sharp, and so intensely flavored that her eyes watered. She couldn't remember the last time she'd tasted anything so vivid, couldn't remember when she'd let herself experience something just for the simple pleasure of it. She ate 3 more before forcing herself to put the bag away, hating how that small kindness had cracked something inside her, had made her feel when she'd worked so hard to feel nothing at all. Owen came to town more frequently after that. Every week, sometimes twice a week, he'd stop by the general store with some need or another. He always sought out Eleanor specifically, always found reasons to engage her in conversation. She remained polite but distant, answering his questions with the minimum words necessary, never volunteering information about herself. But Owen was patient. He talked enough for both of them, sharing stories about his ranch, about the 2 older hands who worked for him and their wives who treated him like a wayward son, about the challenges of building something lasting in this rough country. His ranch, he explained, had belonged to his uncle who died the previous year and left it to Owen, his only living relative. Owen had been working as a wrangler in Wyoming when he inherited the property, and he'd come to Colorado to make something of the opportunity. "It's beautiful land," he said one afternoon in late September, leaning against the counter while Eleanor inventoried stock. "High meadows, good water, mountains on 3 sides. Sometimes I ride up to the north pasture at sunset and just watch the light change. Makes me feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself, you know?" Eleanor didn't know. She'd stopped feeling part of anything bigger than herself 3 years ago. But something in Owen's voice, in the genuine wonder threading through his words, made her pause in her counting. "It sounds nice," she said carefully. "You should see it sometime. The ranch, I mean. We're having a small gathering next month, nothing fancy, just dinner for some of the neighboring ranchers. You'd be welcome to come." "No, thank you." The refusal was automatic, immediate. Owen nodded as though he'd expected nothing less. "Well, the invitation stands if you change your mind." He purchased his supplies and left, and Eleanor told herself she was relieved, told herself she didn't want to see his ranch or his mountains or his sunsets. October arrived with cold winds and the first whispers of snow on the highest peaks. Silver City began preparing for winter, and the general store grew busier as people stocked up on necessities. Eleanor worked longer hours, grateful for the distraction, for the exhaustion that made sleep come easier. She was closing up one evening, the sun already sunk behind the mountains and shadows pooling in the streets, when she heard shouting from the direction of the saloon. This wasn't unusual in a mining town. Men drank and fought and caused scenes. Eleanor normally ignored such disturbances, but something about these voices made her pause, made the hair on the back of her neck rise in primal warning. She was turning back to lock the door when she heard her name. Eleanor Jenkins, I know you're here, you lying witch. The voice was slurred with alcohol and rage, but still horribly familiar. Eleanor's hands went numb, her vision tunneling. It couldn't be. It was impossible. He was dead. She'd seen him die. She'd watched the blood spread across his chest. But it wasn't Robert Morrison's voice. It was his brother's. James Morrison staggered into view down the street, his clothes dusty from travel, his face twisted with 3 years of accumulated hatred. Eleanor had met him only once, briefly, before everything fell apart. He'd been cold toward her even then, suspicious of her relationship with his brother. Now, apparently, he blamed her for Robert's death. "You killed him," James shouted, stumbling closer. "You led him into that alley, you got him shot." People were emerging from buildings, drawn by the commotion. Eleanor stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Every nightmare she'd been running from suddenly made real. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to disappear, but her body wouldn't obey. "That's enough." Owen Tucker's voice cut through the chaos like a knife through silk. He appeared from the direction of the livery, moving with that deceptive speed of his, placing himself between Eleanor and James Morrison. "You need to move along, friend. This ain't your business, Cowboy." James tried to step around Owen, but the larger man simply shifted, blocking his path. "Lady's clearly frightened. That makes it my business." Owen's voice remained calm, but something dangerous lurked beneath the surface, something that made James hesitate. "She killed my brother, got him murdered." "That true, Miss Jenkins?" Owen didn't turn around, didn't take his eyes off James. Eleanor found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "No, I didn't. I was there, but I didn't do anything. I just watched him die." The words, spoken aloud for the first time, seemed to drain something vital from her. Her knees buckled and she caught herself against the door frame. The street swam in and out of focus. Somewhere distant, she heard Owen speaking in low, firm tones, heard other voices joining the conversation, heard James Morrison's protests fading as someone, maybe the deputy, led him away. Then Owen was beside her, his hand gentle on her elbow. "Easy now. Let's get you sitting down." He guided her back into the store, settling her on the stool behind the counter. The world gradually stopped spinning. Eleanor pressed her hands to her face, fighting the tears that threatened, fighting the memories clawing their way up from the dark places where she'd buried them. "Sorry," she managed. "I'm sorry. Nothing to apologize for." Owen crouched in front of her, bringing himself to eye level. "Can you tell me what that was about?" "No, I can't. Please, I just want to be alone." "Not sure that's a good idea right now." That man seemed pretty determined. "He's drunk. He'll sleep it off and leave town." "Maybe, but until we know for sure, I'm not leaving you alone." Owen's tone brooked no argument. "Mr. Miller lives above his store across the street, right? I'll go get him, have him walk you home." "I can walk myself home." "I'm sure you can, but you're not going to." There was no anger in his words, no frustration, just quiet certainty. "Wait here." He was gone before she could protest further. Eleanor sat in the dimness of the store, surrounded by barrels and shelves and the ordinary objects of daily life, and felt the carefully constructed walls of her safe, numb existence crumbling around her. James Morrison had found her. The past had found her. The illusion that she could outrun her own history shattered like glass. Mr. Miller arrived within minutes, clucking with concern, insisting she take the next few days off. Owen hovered in the background, watching with those thoughtful gray-blue eyes while Mr. Miller locked up the store and walked Eleanor the 3 blocks to her boarding house. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, made tea and fussed over her, and eventually Eleanor escaped to her room where she could finally, blessedly, be alone. She didn't cry. She'd cried herself empty 3 years ago. Instead, She sat on her narrow bed and stared at the wall and wondered how many times a person could start over before they simply ran out of places to run. Morning came too soon and too bright. Eleanor rose mechanically, dressed in one of her two plain work dresses, and prepared to face whatever this day would bring. She half expected to find James Morrison waiting outside the boarding house, ready to continue his accusations, but the street was empty save for the usual early morning activity. She went to the general store, despite Mr. Miller's insistence she take time off. Work meant routine, meant structure, meant not thinking. She needed that more than she needed rest. Mr. Miller tried to send her home when she arrived, but something in her face must have convinced him not to push. The morning passed quietly. Eleanor served customers, restocked shelves, and tried not to jump every time the bell above the door chimed. Around noon, Owen appeared, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Thought you might not have eaten," he said, setting the basket on the counter. "Mrs. Martinez, that's one of my ranch hand's wives, she sent this. Figured you could use a decent meal." Eleanor stared at the basket, at this offering from people who didn't know her, who had no reason to care whether she ate or not. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why what? Why do you keep doing this? The candy, the food, defending me last night. You don't know me, I'm nothing to you." Owen was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "You want the honest answer?" "Yes. Because the first time I walked into this store and saw you, I recognized something. Pain, maybe, or loneliness. Same look I saw in the mirror after my uncle died, and I realized I was the last of my line, that I was completely alone in the world. And I thought, if I was hurting like that, I'd want someone to give a damn, even if I couldn't ask for it." He paused, then added, "Also, you helped me pick out fabric without making me feel like an idiot, which I appreciated." The honesty in his words disarmed her. Eleanor had expected flirtation or false charm, something she could easily dismiss. Instead, he'd offered her simple, genuine human kindness, and she had no defense against that. "The man last night," she began, then stopped, unsure how much to reveal. "You don't owe me an explanation. His brother and I were engaged 3 years ago in Denver. I thought I loved him. Turned out he already had a wife." The words came haltingly, like water from a rusted pump. "He died, was shot. I was there. James blames me." Owen absorbed this quietly. "And do you blame yourself?" The question struck something deep and tender. Eleanor looked away, focusing on the grain of the wooden counter. "I don't know. Sometimes. If I hadn't followed Robert that night, if I hadn't been so blind and stupid, if I'd seen who he really was sooner, maybe things would have been different. Or maybe they'd have been exactly the same, just without you there to witness it. Sounds to me like this Robert was on a bad path long before you met him. I should have known. I should have seen the signs." Eleanor. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice made her look up. People who lie for a living are good at it. Doesn't make you stupid for believing them, just makes you someone who trusted in good faith. And look where that got me. It got you here, alive. Working hard. That's more than Robert Morrison can say. Owen's tone was gentle but firm. You survived. That counts for something. Before Eleanor could respond, Mr. Miller emerged from the back room, greeting Owen warmly and drawing him into conversation about supplies for winter. The moment passed, but something had shifted, some small crack in the ice around Eleanor's heart that let in a trickle of warmth she wasn't sure she wanted. She ate the food from the basket later, when she was alone in the back room during her break. Fresh bread, cold chicken, cheese, and an apple that crunched sweetly between her teeth. It was the best meal she'd had in longer than she could remember, and she hated how much that simple kindness affected her, hated the tears that prickled her eyes as she chewed. James Morrison left town the next day, according to Mrs. Henderson's gossip network. The deputy had thrown him in a cell to sleep off his drunk, then escorted him to the edge of town the following morning with a strong suggestion that he never return. Eleanor felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, though she knew the relief was temporary. James knew where she was now. He could come back anytime. She'd never be truly safe from her past. Owen continued his regular visits to the general store, but something had changed in their interactions. Eleanor found herself less guarded, allowing their conversations to extend beyond the bare minimum. He told her about his plans for the ranch, about his hopes to build up a good herd before winter hit hard. She found herself offering opinions, suggesting things she remembered from her brief time living near ranching country as a child. "You know more than you let on," Owen observed one afternoon in mid-October. "My father worked on a ranch in eastern Colorado before he got sick. I was young, but I remember some things." "What happened to him, if you don't mind my asking?" "Fever took both my parents when I was 17. I went to Denver after that, found work in a dress shop." She paused, then added quietly, "Met Robert a few years later." Owen nodded, not pushing for more. They stood in companionable silence while Eleanor measured out the nails he needed. Outside, the aspens were turning gold, painting the mountainsides in shades of amber and bronze. Through the front window, Silver City looked almost pretty in the afternoon light, almost like a place where people could be happy. "That invitation still stands," Owen said as he gathered his purchases. "To the ranch. We're having that gathering this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just neighbors and friends. Be nice if you came." "I don't know, think about it. No pressure either way." He left before she could formulate another excuse. Eleanor stood behind the counter, watching through the window as he loaded his supplies onto his wagon, his movements efficient and practiced. He moved like a man comfortable with physical labor, with the honest work of building something with his own hands. That evening, Mrs. Henderson knocked on Eleanor's door with a package. "This came for you, dear. Young man dropped it off about an hour ago." Inside was a shawl, soft wool in a deep blue that matched the evening sky. A note in careful handwriting read, "Saw this and thought of you. Nights are getting cold. Owen." Eleanor ran her fingers over the fine weave, feeling the quality of the wool, the care that had gone into its making. This wasn't some cheap trinket meant to obligate her. It was a thoughtful gift from someone who'd noticed she walked home in the evenings with only her thin work shawl. Someone who'd paid attention, who'd cared enough to do something about it. She wore the shawl to work the next day. Owen didn't mention it when he stopped by late in the afternoon, but she caught the small smile that crossed his face when he saw it draped around her shoulders. Saturday arrived crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that made the sky seem impossibly blue. Eleanor spent the morning in her room, arguing with herself. She had no good reason to go to Owen's ranch. She didn't want to make friends, didn't want to open herself up to more people who might hurt her. She'd built her walls for good reasons, but a treacherous part of her whispered that she was tired of walls, tired of being alone, tired of the half-life she'd been living. And Owen had been nothing but kind, nothing but patient. Maybe she owed it to him to at least see his ranch, to thank him properly for the shawl and the food and the way he'd stood between her and James Morrison without hesitation. At 2 o'clock, she borrowed Mrs. Henderson's small wagon, hitching up the old mare with practiced efficiency. The directions Owen had given her weeks ago were still tucked in her dresser drawer. She followed them north out of town, into the foothills where the road became more rough, and the civilization of Silver City faded behind her. Owen's ranch appeared after about 45 minutes of steady travel, nestled in a valley with mountains rising on 3 sides just as he described. The house was modest but well built, log construction with a wide porch and stone chimney. Several outbuildings dotted the property: a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals where horses grazed peacefully. Beyond, meadows stretched toward the tree line, golden grass rippling in the breeze. It was, Eleanor had to admit, beautiful. Several wagons were already parked near the house. Eleanor almost turned back, her courage failing, but then Owen emerged from the barn and spotted her. His face lit up with such genuine pleasure that something warm and frightening stirred in her chest. "You came." He strode over to help her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either." She smoothed her skirt nervously, acutely aware that she'd worn her better dress, the dark green one with the small flowers embroidered at the collar. "I can leave if this is a bad time." "It's a perfect time. Come on, I'll introduce you around." The next few hours passed in a blur of names and faces. The neighboring ranchers were weathered, practical people, wary of newcomers but warming when Eleanor proved she could talk knowledgeably about cattle and crops. Owen's ranch hands, Pete and Carlos, were men in their 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands, their wives fussing over Eleanor like mother hens, thanking her for helping Owen pick out the fabric that now hung as cheerful curtains in their homes in the bunkhouse. "He's a good man, Mrs. Martinez," Carlos's wife, confided as they helped set out food on long tables in the yard. "Came here not knowing anything about ranching, but he learned fast. Works harder than any boss I've seen. Never asks anyone to do something he won't do himself." Eleanor glanced across the yard to where Owen was talking with one of the neighbors, his hat pushed back, his expression animated as he gestured toward the mountains. As though sensing her gaze, he looked over and smiled, a slow, warm expression that made her heart stutter in a way she'd thought impossible. Dinner was a loud, cheerful affair. Everyone crowded around the tables laden with food. Eleanor found herself seated next to Owen, their shoulders nearly touching, surrounded by laughter and conversation and the kind of easy camaraderie she hadn't experienced in years. She ate roasted chicken and fresh bread and vegetables from Mrs. Martinez's garden, and everything tasted bright and real. "You doing okay?" Owen asked quietly while the others were distracted by a story Pete was telling. "Yes, this is nice. Your ranch, I mean, and your friends. Not too overwhelming, a little, but nice overwhelming if that makes sense." Owen's smile widened. "It does. I'm glad you came, Eleanor, really glad." The way he said her name, like it meant something, like she meant something, made her chest tighten with emotion she couldn't name. She looked down at her plate, suddenly shy, suddenly aware of how close he was sitting, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way her skin prickled with awareness wherever his arm accidentally brushed hers. After dinner, some of the younger folks started dancing to music from a fiddle one of the neighbors produced. Eleanor watched from the porch, content to observe rather than participate. Owen joined her, leaning against the railing, his profile outlined against the setting sun. "Thank you for inviting me," Eleanor said. "I didn't realize how much I needed this until I got here. You're welcome anytime. Don't have to wait for a gathering." Owen turned to face her, his expression serious. "I mean that, Eleanor. You're welcome here whenever you want. Even if you just need somewhere quiet to sit and think." "Why are you so kind to me?" "I already told you. That was before you knew about Robert, about all the mess I'm carrying around." Owen was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "My uncle, the one who left me this place, he used to say that everybody's carrying something. Some folks wear their burdens on the outside where you can see them, but most carry them inside where they think nobody notices." He said the measure of a person isn't what they carry, but whether they keep walking despite the weight. He met her eyes directly. You keep walking, Eleanor. That tells me everything I need to know. Something cracked inside her then, some fundamental resistance she'd been clinging to. Without planning it, without thinking, she reached out and took Owen's hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, warm and solid and real. They stood like that as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, while music and laughter drifted from the yard, and the first stars began to appear overhead. Eleanor felt something she'd thought dead stir back to life, fragile and terrifying. A tiny flame of hope cupped against the wind. The ride back to Silver City that evening felt both too long and too short. Owen insisted on accompanying her despite her protests, riding his horse alongside her borrowed wagon. They talked about small things, the weather, the upcoming winter, Owen's plans for his herd. Easy conversation that didn't demand too much, but felt companionable rather than awkward. When they reached the boarding house, Owen helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for coming today," he said softly. "Made the whole gathering better having you there. I had a good time, better than I expected." "Does that mean you might come back sometime?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe, if the invitation's still open, always." Owen's thumb brushed gently across her knuckles where he still held her hand. "Sleep well, Eleanor." She watched him ride away, his form gradually disappearing into the darkness, and realized she was smiling. Actually smiling for the first time in longer than she could remember. The sensation felt strange on her face, muscles unused to the expression, but not unpleasant. The following week saw a shift in Eleanor's routine. She still worked at the general store, still kept largely to herself, but now Owen's visits punctuated her days with something to look forward to. They talked more easily now, sharing stories and opinions and small jokes that nobody else would understand. He brought her books from his uncle's collection, knowing she loved to read. She helped him pick out supplies for his house, gradually transforming the bachelor simplicity of his home into something more comfortable. And slowly, carefully, Eleanor began to trust again. Not blindly, not with the naive certainty of her youth, but with clear eyes and measured steps, testing the ground before putting her full weight down. Owen never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. He simply showed up, consistently, reliably, proving through actions rather than words that he meant what he said. November arrived with the first real snow, dusting the mountains white and sending Silver City into winter mode. The general store grew quieter as people hunkered down, venturing out only when necessary. Eleanor found herself thinking about Owen's ranch more often, wondering how he was managing the cold, whether he had enough supplies, whether the stock was safe. She was closing up one evening when Owen appeared, snow dusting his hat and shoulders. "Wanted to check on you before the weather gets worse. Storm coming in tonight, supposed to be a big one. I'm fine. Mrs. Henderson keeps the boarding house warm. Good. I'm heading back now, but I wanted you to know I might not make it to town for a week or so if this storm's as bad as they say. Don't want you thinking I forgot about you." The casual assumption that she'd notice his absence, that she'd care, made Eleanor's heart flutter. "Be careful out there." "Always am." Owen hesitated, then added, "Eleanor, when the weather clears, there's something I'd like to talk to you about, something important." "What is it?" "Rather wait until I can say it proper, but I wanted you to know it's coming so you can think about things." He left before she could press for more information, and Eleanor spent the next week consumed with curiosity and apprehension. The storm hit that night, dropping 2 feet of snow and keeping everyone in Silver City trapped indoors. She had plenty of time to think, perhaps too much time, her mind cycling through possibilities ranging from hopeful to terrifying. Did Owen want to end their friendship? Had she done something wrong? Or, the thought that frightened her most, did he want something more than friendship, something she wasn't sure she was ready to give? The storm cleared after 6 days, leaving Silver City buried in white. Neighbors helped neighbors dig out, creating paths through the drifts. Eleanor worked at the store but spent most of her time staring out the window, watching the road from the north, waiting. Owen appeared on the 8th day, riding into town in the late morning with snow still clinging to his coat. He came straight to the general store, his face reddened from cold but his eyes warm when they found Eleanor behind the counter. "Can you take a break?" he asked without preamble. Mr. Miller, bless him, shooed Eleanor out before she could answer. She grabbed her shawl, the blue one Owen had given her, and followed him outside. He led her to the small park at the edge of town, to a bench someone had thoughtfully cleared of snow. "I've been thinking," Owen began once they were seated. "About you, about me, about what we've been building here." He turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. "Eleanor, I know you've been hurt. I know you've got reasons not to trust, not to believe in people's words. But I need to say this anyway, need you to hear it even if you can't accept it yet." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "Owen, I'm falling in love with you. Maybe already have fallen, I don't know exactly when it happened. But I know that you're the first person I think about in the morning and the last person I think about at night. I know that my ranch feels empty when you're not there, that the whole world feels dimmer when I can't see your face. And I know that I want to spend whatever time you'll give me proving that I'm not like him, that I'm someone you can trust." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows, not painful but overwhelming, too much feeling after years of numbness. She stood abruptly, pacing a few steps away, her breath coming fast. "I can't. Owen, I can't do this. Can't or won't." His voice remained calm, patient, giving her space. "Both." "Neither, I don't know." She pressed her hands to her face, fighting for composure. "You don't understand. When Robert died, when I saw what trusting the wrong person cost, I promised myself I'd never be that vulnerable again. And you're asking me to break that promise, to risk everything on the hope that you're different. I am different. Robert said that too. He said everything you're saying, and it was all lies. How do I know you're telling the truth? How can I ever know for sure?" Owen stood, moving closer but not touching her, respecting her need for space. "You can't. That's the hell of it, Eleanor. There's no guarantee, no promise I can make that's proof against your fear. The only way to know for sure is to take the risk, to let yourself trust and see what happens. And if I can't, if I'm too broken to do that, then I'll wait. Simple, certain, unwavering. I'll wait until you're ready or until you tell me to stop waiting, but I won't pretend I don't feel this and I won't give up on you easily." Eleanor turned to face him, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. This man, this patient, steady man who'd shown her nothing but kindness, who'd defended her and fed her and given her space to be broken without demanding she fix herself for him. He was offering her everything she'd thought she'd lost forever, and she was so terrified of accepting that she could barely breathe. "I need time," she whispered. "Take all you need. I'm not going anywhere." They walked back to the store in silence, but Owen took her hand halfway there and Eleanor let him. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental, a tiny act of faith that took every ounce of courage she possessed. December settled over Silver City like a heavy blanket, cold and quiet. Eleanor found herself at a crossroads, caught between the safety of her emotional isolation and the terrifying possibility of opening her heart again. Owen continued his visits, never pushing, never demanding an answer to his confession, simply being present and steady and there. Christmas approached, and Mrs. Henderson decorated the boarding house with pine boughs and ribbon. The general store did brisk business in gifts and supplies for holiday meals. Eleanor went through the motions, but her mind was elsewhere, turning over Owen's words again and again, examining them from every angle for hidden traps or false notes. She found none. That was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all, that he seemed genuinely, honestly, completely truthful. No red flags waved. No warning bells rang. Just a good man offering her his heart with no strings attached, asking only that she consider accepting it. On Christmas Eve, Owen came to town for church services. Eleanor had been attending sporadically at Mr. Miller's gentle urging, and she found herself standing next to Owen in the small church, their voices blending in familiar hymns. Afterward, he walked her home through the snow-quiet streets, their breath forming clouds in the frozen air. "I have something for you," he said when they reached the boarding house. He pulled a small package from his coat pocket, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Don't open it yet. Wait until you're alone when you can think about it properly." Eleanor accepted the gift, her fingers brushing his. "Owen, I didn't get you anything. Don't need anything. Just wanted you to have this." He touched the brim of his hat in his customary gesture. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor." She waited until she was in her room, door closed and lamp lit, before unwrapping the package. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the wood smooth as silk beneath her fingers. Inside the box lay a letter, folded once, her name written on the outside in Owen's careful script. Eleanor's hands shook as she unfolded the paper and began to read. "Eleanor, I'm not good with fancy words, never have been, but I need you to understand some things. When I look at you, I don't see someone broken. I see someone strong enough to survive something that would have destroyed a weaker person. I see intelligence and courage and a kind of quiet grace that takes my breath away. You think you're damaged beyond repair, but I see someone who's been tested and came through still capable of kindness, still willing to help an ignorant cowboy pick out fabric, still able to smile when you think nobody's watching. That's not broken. That's resilient. That's beautiful. I carved this box during the storm, sitting by my fire and thinking about you. Each flower represents something I see in you: strength, courage, hope, beauty, grace. I'm not asking you to stop being cautious. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe you've been healed more than you realize, and maybe it's safe to try again. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. But know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere, and when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be waiting. Merry Christmas, with all my love, Owen." Eleanor read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, years of pent-up emotion finally breaking free. She clutched the wooden box to her chest and let herself cry, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that she was tired of being afraid, tired of hiding, tired of letting Robert Morrison's ghost dictate her future. She loved Owen Tucker. Somewhere between his patient kindness and his steady presence, between lemon drops and blue shawls and carved boxes, she'd fallen completely, terrifyingly in love with him. And maybe that was terrifying. Maybe it was a risk. Maybe she was setting herself up to be hurt again. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. The morning of December 26th dawned clear and cold. Eleanor rose early, dressed carefully, and borrowed Mrs. Henderson's wagon again. The ride to Owen's ranch felt both endless and instantaneous, her heart pounding the entire way, her courage threatening to fail with every mile. Owen was in the barn when she arrived, mucking out stalls. He looked up in surprise when she appeared in the doorway, backlit by winter sunlight, the carved box clutched in her hands. "Eleanor, is everything all right? I read your letter." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I read it several times, actually." Owen set down his pitchfork, giving her his full attention. And you're right, about me being stronger than I thought, about healing more than I realized." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to continue. "I'm terrified, Owen. Absolutely terrified of trusting someone again, of being wrong again, of ending up hurt again. But I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life alone because I was too afraid to take a chance on something real. Eleanor." He moved toward her slowly, as though approaching a skittish horse. "I love you." The words burst from her in a rush. "I don't know when it happened. I don't know how you managed to get past all my walls, but I love you and I'm tired of fighting it. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting the past control my future." Owen closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cup her face gently. "Say that again. I love you." Easier this time, the words flowing more smoothly. "Again. I love you, Owen Tucker." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and careful, a kiss that asked rather than demanded, that offered rather than took. Eleanor dropped the wooden box, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, and kissed him back with 3 years of loneliness and longing and desperate hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too, so much. I'm going to spend every day proving you can trust me, Eleanor. I promise you that. I believe you." And miraculously, impossibly, she did. Not blindly, not without reservations, but with a clear-eyed faith built on months of consistent action, on proof rather than promises. They stood in the barn, holding each other, while horses shuffled in their stalls and weak winter sunlight streamed through gaps in the walls. Eleanor felt something unfurl inside her, something that had been locked tight for 3 years, a sense of possibility and hope and future. "So what happens now?" she asked eventually. "Well, I'm hoping to convince you to marry me, but I figure I should probably court you properly first. Take you to dinner, walk with you, all the things I should have been doing instead of just haunting the general store." Eleanor laughed, an actual laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside. "You've been courting me for months, you just didn't call it that. Fair point. So what do you say? Will you let me court you officially? With the understanding that I'm hoping it ends with you agreeing to be my wife." "Yes." No hesitation, no doubt, just simple acceptance. "Yes, I'll let you court me, though I should warn you I'm probably going to panic occasionally and try to run away. And I'll probably panic occasionally wondering if I'm doing this right. We'll figure it out together." Owen kissed her forehead tenderly. "I've got nowhere else to be, Eleanor. Take all the time you need." The winter passed in a blur of courtship and discovery. Eleanor spent her Sundays at the ranch, getting to know Owen's world, learning about cattle and horses and the rhythm of ranch life. Owen came to town twice a week, taking her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, walking with her through snowy streets, sitting with her in the boarding house parlor under Mrs. Henderson's approving eye. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Eleanor told Owen about her parents, about the guilt she carried from Robert's death, about the nightmares that still sometimes woke her in the night. Owen shared his own losses, his parents killed in a wagon accident when he was 15, his years of lonely wandering before inheriting the ranch, his fear that he wasn't good enough to make the ranch succeed. "We're quite a pair," Eleanor observed one Sunday afternoon in February. They were sitting on the porch of his ranch house, bundled in blankets against the cold, watching clouds build over the mountains. "Best pair I can imagine." Owen took her hand, their fingers interlacing naturally now. "Eleanor, I don't want to rush you, but I need you to know that I'm sure. About us. About wanting to marry you. Whenever you're ready, if that's tomorrow or next year or 5 years from now, my answer will be yes. Eleanor turned to look at him, this patient, loving man who'd taken her broken pieces and held them carefully until she could put herself back together. Ask me. What? Ask me properly. Now, ask me to marry you. Owen's eyes widened. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. I'm sure. I'm terrified and uncertain and probably a little crazy, but I'm sure. So ask me, Owen. He stood, pulling her up with him, then dropped to one knee in the snow on the porch, still holding her hand. Eleanor Jenkins, you're the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. You've survived things that would have broken lesser people, and somehow you still have the courage to love again. I'm asking you to take a chance on me, on us, on the life we could build together. Will you marry me? Yes. The word came out clear and strong. Yes, I'll marry you. Owen stood, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Eleanor kissed him back with all the love and hope and trust she'd thought she'd lost forever. They were married in March, in the small church in Silver City with half the town in attendance. Mr. Miller gave Eleanor away, tears streaming down his weathered face. Mrs. Henderson wept openly in the front pew. Pete and Carlos served as Owen's groomsmen, their wives fussing over Eleanor's simple white dress like she was their own daughter. Eleanor spoke her vows with a steady voice, promising to love and honor and trust, meaning every word. When Owen slipped the ring onto her finger, she felt the last chains of her past fall away, felt herself finally, completely free. The ranch became home. Eleanor quit her job at the general store, and Mr. Miller hired the widow Thompson's eldest daughter to replace her. Eleanor threw herself into ranch life, learning to help with the stock, tending the large garden, turning Owen's bachelor house into a real home. She made curtains from the fabric she'd helped him choose all those months ago, hung pictures on the walls, filled the rooms with warmth and light. Owen proved every day that her trust was well placed. He was consistent, honest, faithful. When disagreements arose, as they inevitably did, he talked through them rather than storming off. When Eleanor had bad days, when the old fears rose up, he held her and reminded her that she was safe, that she was loved, that he wasn't going anywhere. Their first year of marriage was a revelation. Eleanor discovered that love didn't have to hurt, that trust could be earned through steady action. That partnership meant supporting each other through hard times, rather than running when things got difficult. She learned to believe in happiness again, in futures that extended beyond just surviving the present. Summer arrived with wildflowers carpeting the high meadows. Eleanor stood on the porch one evening in July, watching Owen ride in from checking the stock. Her hand rested on the slight swell of her belly, still barely visible beneath her dress. She discovered her pregnancy 2 weeks ago, but had been waiting for the right moment to tell him. As he dismounted and walked toward her, his face lighting up at the sight of her, she decided the right moment was now. "Owen, come here. I have something to tell you." He bounded up the porch steps, gathering her into his arms for a kiss. "What is it? We're going to have a baby." "In February, the doctor thinks." Owen went very still, his eyes searching her face. "A baby, we're going to be parents." "Yes. Are you happy?" "Happy," he laughed, lifting her off her feet and spinning her gently. "I'm terrified and thrilled and more in love with you than I thought possible. We're going to have a baby." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Owen's hand resting protectively over their unborn child. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, marveling at how far she'd come from the broken, frightened woman who'd stood behind the counter of a general store, believing she'd never trust or love again. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked softly. "About how wrong I was. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never be happy again. And now look at us. I have you, we have this ranch, we're starting a family. I'm happy, Owen. Actually, genuinely happy. You deserve it. You deserve all of this and more." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, Eleanor, for trusting me when trust didn't come easy. Thank you for being patient, for seeing past the broken parts to who I could be. You were never broken, just hurt. There's a difference." They sat in peaceful silence as stars began to appear overhead, the first crickets of summer chirping in the grass. Eleanor thought about the long journey that had brought her here, about Robert Morrison, and the pain he'd caused, about James Morrison and his misplaced blame, about all the walls she'd built to protect a heart she thought was too damaged to risk again. And she thought about Owen, about his steady kindness and patient love, about how he'd never tried to fix her but had simply been there while she fixed herself. She thought about the life growing inside her, about the family they were creating, about the future stretching ahead filled with possibility instead of fear. February arrived cold and clear. Eleanor went into labor on a Sunday afternoon, with snow falling softly outside and a fire crackling in the hearth. Mrs. Martinez and Mrs. Henderson attended the birth, coaching Eleanor through the pain while Owen paced holes in the floor downstairs. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and squalling, it was a boy. Owen held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face while Eleanor watched from the bed, exhausted but elated. "What should we name him?" Owen asked, his voice thick with emotion. Eleanor had been thinking about this for months. "Thomas, after your uncle, the one who left you this ranch. He gave us this life in a way. Thomas Tucker." Owen tested the name, then smiled. "It's perfect. He's perfect. You're perfect." Little Thomas proved to be a demanding but joyful addition to their lives. Eleanor discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, managing the baby and the household and still helping Owen with the ranch when she could. They were exhausted and overwhelmed and happier than either had dreamed possible. The years rolled on, bringing changes and challenges. The ranch prospered under Owen's careful management. They hired more hands as the herd grew, built a larger barn, added rooms to the house. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic toddler with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's determination. When Thomas was 3, Eleanor gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Catherine. The house filled with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. Owen proved to be a devoted father, patient with the children's questions, playful in the evenings after work, firm but kind with discipline. Eleanor sometimes thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived in Silver City, hollow-eyed and numb, convinced she'd never feel anything again. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different life. The Eleanor who stood in her garden on a summer evening, watching her husband teach their son to ride while the twins played in the grass, was whole and healed and vibrantly alive. One evening in September, 10 years after that first meeting in the general store, Eleanor and Owen sat on their porch watching another sunset. The children were asleep inside, the ranch quiet around them. Owen's arm was draped around Eleanor's shoulders, and she leaned into him with the easy comfort of long familiarity. "You ever think about how we started?" Owen asked. "You behind that counter, looking like you wanted to disappear, me stumbling through trying to buy fabric." Eleanor smiled at the memory. "I was so determined not to let anyone in, you made that very difficult. I was pretty persistent. You were patient. There's a difference." She turned to look at him, this man who'd taken a chance on a broken woman and never given up. "Thank you, Owen. For everything. For seeing me when I was trying to be invisible. For waiting when I needed time. For loving me when I wasn't sure I deserved it. You always deserved it. I just had to convince you of that." He kissed her gently. "Best day of my life was when you walked into my barn with that wooden box and told me you loved me. Everything good in my life traces back to that moment. Mine too." Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder, watching the light fade from the sky. "I was so scared, terrified, really. But you made it safe to be scared, safe to try again. That's what love is supposed to do, make a safe place for each other." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars emerge one by one. From inside the house came the distant sound of Thomas calling out in his sleep, then settling again. Somewhere across the valley, a coyote howled, answered by another from the opposite ridge. Eleanor thought about trust, about how fragile and precious it was, how hard to build and how easy to destroy. She thought about the trust she'd given Owen, how he'd honored it every single day for 10 years, proving over and over that he was worthy of the gift. She thought about their children, growing up in a house filled with love and security, never knowing the kind of pain their mother had survived. "Tell me again," she said softly. "Tell you what? That you love me. That you're not going anywhere." Owen turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face the way he had that morning in the barn when she'd first confessed her love. "I love you, Eleanor Tucker. I loved you when you were hiding behind walls, and I love you now that you've torn them down. I'll love you tomorrow and the day after and every day until I draw my last breath. And I'm not going anywhere except wherever you are. That's a promise I've kept for 10 years, and I'll keep it for the next 50 if God gives us that much time." That's all I needed to hear. Eleanor kissed him, slow and deep and full of a decade's worth of love and trust and gratitude. When they broke apart, both were smiling. The moon rose over the mountains, bathing the valley in silver light. Inside the house, their children slept safely, dreaming whatever dreams children dream. The cattle were settled in the fields, the horses quiet in the barn, the land peaceful under the vast Wyoming sky. Eleanor Jenkins Tucker sat on her porch beside her husband, holding his hand and looking at the life they'd built together from broken pieces and patient love. She thought about how far she'd traveled from that day in the general store, from the woman too scared to trust, too hurt to hope, too broken to believe in second chances. She thought about how wrong she'd been about so many things, because she hadn't been broken. She'd been hurt, yes. Damaged, certainly, but not broken. And with patience and kindness and time, with someone willing to wait while she healed, she'd become stronger than she'd ever been before. She'd learned that trust wasn't naive belief in someone's words. It was a carefully built structure founded on consistent action. She'd learned that love didn't have to hurt, that healthy relationships required honesty and patience and commitment. Most importantly, she'd learned that she was stronger than her past, that she could survive heartbreak and come out the other side capable of loving again, of trusting again, of building a life worth living. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "About how glad I am that you were too stubborn to give up on me." "Wasn't stubborn, was sure. There's a difference." Owen smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "Besides, you were worth waiting for, worth every minute. Even when I was difficult and scared and trying to push you away. Especially then. Anyone can love someone when it's easy, Eleanor. Real love is staying when it's hard, waiting when it would be simpler to walk away, believing in someone when they've stopped believing in themselves." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind of tears that came from overwhelming emotion rather than pain. How did I get so lucky to find you? Think we found each other. Right time, right place, right people. Owen pulled her closer. And now we have this, all of it. The ranch, the kids, this life. Not bad for a cowboy who didn't know how to buy fabric and a woman who thought she'd never trust again. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the quiet valley. Eleanor thought about their future, about watching their children grow, about growing old together on this land they'd built into something real and lasting. She thought about grandchildren someday, about passing down the ranch to the next generation, about sitting on this same porch in 40 years with Owen beside her, gray-haired and wrinkled but still steady, still true. I love you, she said, because those words never got old, never lost their power. I love you too. Owen kissed the top of her head, now and always. The years continued to unfold like pages in a well-loved book. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Sarah and Catherine, inseparable as only twins can be, brought music and laughter to the household. 2 more children followed, a boy named William and a girl named Grace, rounding out the family. Eleanor discovered she had a talent for breeding horses, developing a reputation throughout the territory for quality stock. Owen expanded the cattle operation, building the ranch into one of the most successful in the region. They prospered, not through luck but through hard work and partnership, through supporting each other's dreams and weathering difficulties together. Mr. Miller passed away when Thomas was 12, leaving the general store to his nephew. Mrs. Henderson sold the boarding house and moved into a small cottage on the edge of town. Pete and Carlos eventually retired, though they stayed on the property in a cabin Owen built for them, too attached to the ranch to truly leave. Through all the changes, through births and deaths and joys and sorrows, Eleanor and Owen remained each other's constant. They argued sometimes, disagreed on decisions, got frustrated with each other the way any couple does after years together. But they never stopped talking, never stopped working through problems, never stopped choosing each other. On their 20th anniversary, Owen surprised Eleanor with a trip to Denver. She hadn't been back to the city since fleeing after Robert's death, had avoided it deliberately, not wanting to confront those memories. But Owen thought it was time, thought she needed to face that last ghost and prove to herself that she'd truly moved beyond it. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, walked through the city that had once represented all of Eleanor's pain and fear. She found herself feeling nothing but a distant sadness for the young woman she'd been, for all the pain that girl had endured. But that girl was gone, transformed into the strong, confident woman walking beside her husband, unafraid of the past because the present was so rich and full. On their last day in Denver, Eleanor asked Owen to take her to the alley where Robert had died. He did so without question, though she could feel his concern, his readiness to support her however she needed. They stood in that narrow space between buildings, now just an ordinary alley with nothing to mark the violence that had occurred there 2 decades earlier. "I forgive you," Eleanor said quietly, speaking to the ghost of Robert Morrison. "For the lies, for the pain, for making me think I was worthless. I forgive you because holding on to anger only hurts me, and I'm tired of letting you take up space in my life. You don't get to haunt me anymore." Owen squeezed her hand, saying nothing, just being present while she exorcised this last demon. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside her, some final weight lifting from her shoulders. She turned away from the alley and walked toward the bright street beyond, toward the sunshine and the future and the life she'd built from ashes. "Thank you," she told Owen as they headed back to the hotel, "for understanding that I needed to do this." "You're stronger than you know," Owen replied. "Always have been. I'm just privileged to witness it." They returned to the ranch and to their children and to the life that continued to unfold in beautiful, surprising ways. Thomas married at 22, bringing a kind, capable young woman named Anna into the family. Sarah developed a passion for teaching and opened a small school on the ranch for children from neighboring properties. Catherine fell in love with a young doctor who opened a practice in Silver City, giving the town its first permanent physician. Eleanor watched her children build their own lives, make their own choices, and felt a deep satisfaction in knowing they'd grown up secure in their parents' love, never doubting that they were valued and supported. She and Owen had broken the cycle of pain and betrayal, had created something healthy and strong that would echo through generations. Years passed, sweet and swift. Eleanor's hair turned gray, then white. Owen's back grew stiff from decades of ranch work. They moved slower, tired more easily, but the core of what they were together remained unchanged. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands, still told each other they loved each other every single day. When Eleanor was 68 and Owen 72, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The ranch house overflowed with family, with noise and laughter, and the beautiful chaos of multiple generations gathered in love. Thomas, now running the ranch himself, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that love is patient, that trust is earned, that family is everything, who built this ranch with their own hands and their own hearts, who showed us what it means to be partners, to support each other, to never give up on each other. We're all here because of your love, and we're grateful every day for the example you've set." Eleanor looked around the room at all these lives that had stemmed from her decision to trust again, from Owen's decision to be patient and kind. She thought about the woman she'd been 50 years ago, hollow-eyed and broken, and wanted to tell that young woman that it would all be okay. That pain didn't last forever. That love was worth the risk. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Eleanor and Owen sat on their porch one more time. The moon was full, the mountains dark silhouettes against a star-filled sky. They'd sat here thousands of times over 5 decades, but each time still felt precious, still felt like a gift. 50 years, Eleanor marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. Best 50 years of my life. Owen's voice was rougher now with age, but still steady, still sure. Best decision I ever made, walking into that general store and seeing you behind the counter. Best decision I ever made was saying yes when you asked me to marry you. Took you long enough. Owen's eyes twinkled with gentle teasing. I needed time, and you gave it to me. That's what made all the difference, Owen. You gave me time and space to heal without making me feel bad about needing it. Because you were worth waiting for. I knew that from the start. Eleanor leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the absolute reliability that had never wavered in 50 years. I was so scared of trusting you, so certain I'd be hurt again. And have I hurt you? Never intentionally. We've had our disagreements, our hard times, but you've never broken my trust, not once. You've been exactly who you promised to be. That's all I ever wanted, to be worthy of you. Owen kissed her forehead tenderly. Think we did all right, Eleanor. Built something real, something that'll last beyond us. We did better than all right. We did wonderful. Eleanor closed her eyes, listening to the familiar sounds of their ranch at night, the cattle lowing softly in distant fields, the horses moving in the barn, an owl hooting from somewhere in the darkness. This was home. This was family. This was love. They sat there until the moon set, and the sky began to lighten with false dawn. Two old people who'd spent a lifetime proving that broken things could be mended, that trust could be rebuilt, that love was always worth the risk if you found the right person. Eleanor Jenkins Tucker had learned that she was stronger than her past, braver than her fears, and capable of more love than she'd ever imagined. And she'd learned it all because one patient cowboy had seen something worth saving in a frightened woman behind a store counter, had refused to give up until she saw it too. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and pink, Eleanor turned to Owen and smiled. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what? For everything. For seeing me, for waiting, for loving me, for giving me this life." Owen gathered her into his arms, holding her the way he had 1,000 times before, solid and sure and safe. "Thank you for trusting me, for taking a chance, for building this beautiful life with me." They stayed there as the sun climbed higher, warming the earth, starting another day. Around them, the ranch began to wake up, their family stirring, another generation preparing to carry on what Eleanor and Owen had built. It was, Eleanor thought, the perfect ending to a story that had started in pain and fear, but had transformed into something beautiful beyond imagining. She'd been too broken to trust, had thought her heart was too damaged to ever love again. But Owen had slowly, patiently put her pieces back together, not by fixing her, but by being steady enough that she could fix herself. And now, looking back across 5 decades of love and partnership, of children and grandchildren and a legacy that would outlive them both, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that every scary step, every moment of vulnerability, every risk she'd taken in trusting again had been worth it. Because love, real love, was always worth the risk.